The dust-stained letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by the same weathered postman who delivered every piece of mail to Twin Falls, Idaho, for the past 20 years. Delilah Hayes stared at the crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing her name, her fingers trembling slightly as she recognized the bold, slanted handwriting. It was from him, the man she'd tried so hard to forget. Tucker Wilson had written to her after 5 long years of silence, and now his words threatened to unravel the careful life she'd built for herself in his absence. Twin Falls in 1885 was hardly the same sleepy town she'd left behind when she fled eastward with a broken heart and desperate dreams. The settlement had grown, stretching its dusty arms along the Snake River, drawing in more settlers with promises of fertile land and fresh beginnings. Delilah had returned only 6 months ago, after her father's passing left her the sole heir to his modest mercantile store. Coming home meant facing old ghosts, but she'd convinced herself that the most haunting specter of them, all Tucker Wilson, had long since moved on to greener pastures and newer conquests. She broke the seal on the letter, her eyes darting across the page as she read his words. Tucker was coming back to Twin Falls. The cattle drive he was leading would bring him through town in less than a week. He wanted to see her. Delilah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, her mind racing with memories she tried to bury under years of careful forgetting. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how he'd risked his life saving her from the river during that terrible spring flood. The promises they'd whispered under starlit skies, promises he'd broken when he chose the open range over their future together. Miss Hayes. A young boy's voice pulled her from her thoughts. 10-year-old Billy Jenkins stood before the counter, clutching a list in his small hand. "Ma needs these supplies, if you please." Delilah forced a smile. "Of course, Billy. Let me see that list." As she gathered flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples, Delilah made her decision. When Tucker Wilson rode back into Twin Falls, she would meet him with polite indifference. She would show him that the young, naive girl who had once adored him was gone, replaced by a woman who had survived heartbreak and built a life without him. What she wouldn't do was allow him to sweep back into her heart. Not again. Not ever. The days passed too quickly. Delilah found herself glancing up every time the bell above the door jingled, half expecting, half dreading to see Tucker's tall frame filling the doorway. By Friday, her nerves were stretched thin as piano wire. It was nearly closing time when she heard the commotion outside, horses' hooves and men's voices, the unmistakable sounds of a cattle drive arriving at the edge of town. Delilah's hands froze on the ledger she'd been balancing. They were here. He was here. She didn't have to wait long. The bell jangled, and Delilah looked up to see Tucker Wilson standing in her store, hat in hand, looking as though he'd stepped directly from her memories. 5 years had only improved him, his shoulders broader beneath his duster, his face more weathered but still handsome, with those same intense blue eyes that had once seen straight through to her soul. "Delilah," he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "Mr. Wilson, welcome back to Twin Falls." The formality stung him. She could see it in the slight wince that crossed his features before he masked it with a crooked smile. "It's still Tucker to you, D. Always has been." "What can I help you with today?" Delilah asked, ignoring the nickname that only he had ever used. "I'm sure your men need supplies." Tucker stepped closer to the counter, setting his hat down. There was trail dust on his clothes and a weariness around his eyes, but underneath it all was the same confident man who had broken her heart. "My foreman's handling the supplies," he said. "I came to see you." "Well, you've seen me." Delilah busied herself reorganizing items on the shelf behind the counter. I'm sure you'll find Twin Falls much changed since you left." "Some things never change," Tucker replied, his voice low, "like how beautiful you are." Delilah turned to face him, her expression carefully composed. "Flattery was always your strong suit, Mr. Wilson, but I'm not the same girl you left behind." "No," he agreed, studying her face. "You're stronger. I can see it in your eyes." The door opened again, saving Delilah from having to respond. Several cowhands entered, boisterous after the long drive, their spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "Boss," one called to Tucker, "Larson says we'll need more grain than expected." Tucker nodded but didn't take his eyes from Delilah. "We'll be staying in Twin Falls for a few days," he told her. "Resting the herd before moving on to boys. I'd like to call on you properly. Tomorrow evening, perhaps." Delilah wanted to refuse. Every sensible part of her mind screamed to send him away. But her traitorous heart fluttered at the earnestness in his eyes. "I close the store at 6, she said finally. "I suppose you could come by then." The smile that broke across Tucker's face was like sunrise over the plains. "6 it is," he said, retrieving his hat. "Until tomorrow, D." After he left, Delilah sank onto her stool, her legs suddenly weak. She hadn't expected the rush of emotions his presence would bring. Anger at his abandonment, certainly, but also that unwelcome spark of attraction that had never fully died, no matter how hard she'd tried to extinguish it. "Fool girl," she muttered to herself as she locked up for the night. "He'll only break your heart again." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that made the Twin Falls Valley shine like a jewel. Delilah rose early, as was her habit, and found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her chestnut hair in a more becoming style, selecting her green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "This isn't for him," she told her reflection firmly. "This is because it's Saturday, and Saturdays are always busy at the store." The lie didn't even convince herself. The mercantile was indeed busy, with ranch wives stocking up for the week and curious townfolk finding excuses to stop in, eager for gossip about Tucker Wilson's return and his apparent interest in Delilah Hayes. By mid-afternoon, Delilah was exhausted from fielding not-so-subtle inquiries about her gentleman caller. "I heard he's made quite a name for himself," said Mrs. Perkins, the banker's wife, as she selected buttons for a new dress. "They say his ranch in Montana Territory is one of the largest north of the Yellowstone." "Is that so?" Delilah replied noncommittally. "Indeed." Mrs. Perkins leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And still unmarried from what I understand, quite the eligible bachelor." "I wouldn't know about that," Delilah said, wrapping the buttons in paper. "Will there be anything else today?" As the day wore on, Delilah's nerves frayed further. What was she thinking, agreeing to see Tucker? What could he possibly have to say that would matter after 5 years of silence? At precisely 6 o'clock, as Delilah was turning the sign from open to closed, Tucker appeared at the door. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his dark hair still damp from a recent bath, his clothes fresh. In one hand he carried a small bunch of wildflowers. "These are for you," he said, offering the purple and yellow blooms. "I remembered how you always loved the wildflowers along Crow Creek." Delilah accepted them cautiously. "Thank you, they're lovely." An awkward silence fell between them, 5 years of unspoken words creating a chasm neither seemed to know how to cross. "I thought we might walk down to the river," Tucker suggested finally. "Like we used to." Delilah hesitated, then nodded. "Let me put these in water first." As they walked side by side through town, Delilah was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk and the whispers that followed in their wake. Tucker seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply accustomed to being the center of attention. "Your father's store looks well kept," he commented. "You've done a good job with it." "Thank you," Delilah replied. "It wasn't easy at first. Many people in town weren't used to dealing with a woman in business." Tucker nodded. "But they came around, I'd wager. You always were stubborn as a mule when you set your mind to something." Despite herself, Delilah smiled at that. Some things don't change. They reached the river as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the water. The spot was familiar, a small clearing among cottonwood trees where they had spent countless hours in their younger days, dreaming of the future. Tucker settled onto a fallen log, stretching his long legs before him. "I've thought about this place often," he said quietly. "About you too." Delilah remained standing, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "You have a strange way of showing it. Not a single letter in 5 years, Tucker." He looked up at her, his expression pained. "I wrote dozens, started hundreds more, never sent them. Why not?" Tucker sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Pride at first, then shame. The longer I stayed away, the harder it became to find the right words." "And what words would those have been?" Delilah asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Sorry I chose cattle over you. Sorry I broke every promise I made." "Yes," Tucker said simply. "That's exactly what I should have said. I'm sorry, Dee, more than you can know." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Delilah found herself sitting beside him on the log, though she maintained a careful distance between them. "Why are you here, Tucker? Really?" He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left Twin Falls, when I left you. I told myself I needed to make my fortune first, to prove I could provide for you. But that was just an excuse. I was young and foolish and scared of how much I loved you." Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. "And now I'm still in love with you," Tucker said, his voice rough with emotion. 5 years, thousands of miles, and I've never stopped loving you for a single day." The words she had once longed to hear now filled Delilah with a complicated mixture of longing and fear. "You can't just ride back into town and expect everything to be the same," she said. "I'm not the same girl who watched you ride away. That girl believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I know better now." Tucker reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Delilah let him take it. His palm was warm and calloused against her skin. "I don't expect anything," he said softly. "I only hope for a chance to prove that I've changed, that I'm worthy of your trust again." Delilah withdrew her hand gently. "I don't know if that's possible. Will you at least give me the opportunity to try?" "I'll be in Twin Falls for 2 weeks before the drive continues to Boise." Delilah stood, brushing off her skirts. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." Tucker rose as well, respecting the distance she placed between them. "That's more than I deserve," he said. "Thank you." They walked back to town in silence, the first stars appearing overhead. When they reached the Mercantile, Tucker paused at the door. "Good night, Delilah," he said, his voice gentle. "Sweet dreams." It was what he used to say every night when they were courting. The familiar words sent an ache through Delilah's chest. "Good night, Tucker," she replied, slipping inside before he could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Sleep evaded Delilah that night. She tossed and turned in her bed above the store, Tucker's words playing over and over in her mind. He still loved her. After all this time, after all the hurt, he claimed his feelings remained unchanged. Could she believe him? More importantly, could she trust him not to hurt her again? The next morning was Sunday, and Delilah prepared for church with mechanical motions, her mind elsewhere. She donned her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her fair skin, and pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style. When she arrived at the small white church on the edge of town, the first person she saw was Tucker, standing outside in conversation with Reverend Thomas. He looked handsome in a dark suit, his hat held respectfully in his hands. His face brightened when he spotted her, and he excused himself from the reverend to meet her at the bottom of the church steps. "Good morning," he said, a slight nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "May I escort you inside?" The proper thing would be to accept, especially with half the town watching. Delilah nodded, allowing Tucker to offer his arm as they ascended the steps together. Whispers followed them as they entered the church. Delilah felt the curious stares of the congregation as Tucker guided her to a pew near the back. This would be the talk of Twin Falls for days. She knew Delilah Hayes and Tucker Wilson, together again after all these years. Throughout the service, Delilah was acutely aware of Tucker beside her, his deep voice joining in the hymns, his attentive posture during Reverend Thomas's sermon on forgiveness and redemption. A sermon that felt all too pointed, given the circumstances. "The hardest person to forgive is often the one we've loved the most," the Reverend said, his eyes seeming to linger on Delilah and Tucker. "For it is in loving deeply that we become most vulnerable to hurt." After the service concluded, Tucker and Delilah found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and the curious. Mayor Simmons pumped Tucker's hand enthusiastically. "Fine to see you back, Wilson. I hear your cattle operation has grown considerably since you left our little town." "It's done well enough," Tucker replied modestly, "though Twin Falls has always felt more like home than anywhere else." His gaze shifted to Delilah as he spoke, and she felt a warm flush spread across her cheeks. "Mrs. Perkins appeared at Delilah's elbow, her expression alight with barely contained excitement. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Wilson, you simply must join us for Sunday dinner. Nothing formal, just a few friends gathering after church." Delilah opened her mouth to decline, but Tucker spoke first. "We'd be delighted, Mrs. Perkins. Wouldn't we, Dee?" Trapped by propriety, Delilah forced a smile. "Of course. How kind of you to invite us." The Perkins home was one of the grandest in Twin Falls. A two-story structure with a wide veranda and elegant furnishings that reflected Mr. Perkins's success as the town banker. Their dining room comfortably held 12, and today, every seat was filled with the town's most prominent citizens, all of whom seemed extraordinarily interested in Tucker Wilson's return and his apparent reconciliation with Delilah Hayes. "Tell us, Mr. Wilson," said Judge Abbott as the roast was served, "what brings you back to our neck of the woods after so long away?" Tucker's eyes met Delilah's across the table. "Unfinished business," he replied. "Some things are worth coming back for." The judge's wife smiled knowingly. "How romantic! And will you be staying in Twin Falls permanently, Mr. Wilson?" Delilah tensed, awaiting Tucker's answer. This was the crux of it, wasn't it? No matter what pretty words he spoke, his life was in Montana now. His ranch, his business, his future. "That depends," Tucker said carefully, "on whether I have reason to stay." All eyes shifted to Delilah, who suddenly found her roast beef extraordinarily interesting. The conversation mercifully moved to other topics: the upcoming Harvest Festival, the railroad's plans to expand service to Twin Falls, the new schoolteacher expected to arrive next month. After dinner, the men retired to Mr. Perkins's study for cigars, while the women gathered in the parlor for tea. Delilah endured a barrage of thinly veiled inquiries about her relationship with Tucker. "He's certainly matured into a fine figure of a man," observed Mrs. Abbott, stirring her tea. "And quite successful from what I hear. A woman could do far worse." "Indeed," agreed Mrs. Simmons. And at your age, Delilah, opportunities for a suitable match grow scarcer each year. Delilah bristled at the implication. At 26, she was hardly on the shelf. I've never measured my worth by my marital status, she said coolly. My father's business provides me with independence many women would envy. Mrs. Perkins patted her hand condescendingly. Of course, dear, but a woman alone in the world, well, it isn't natural. And Mr. Wilson clearly still holds a torch for you. Before Delilah could formulate a suitably cutting response, the men rejoined them. Tucker immediately sought her out, his expression concerned as he noted her flushed cheeks and tight lips. Everything all right? He asked quietly, taking a seat beside her on the settee. Perfectly fine, Delilah replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. Just enjoying the unique pleasure of having my personal life dissected for the entertainment of Twin Falls society. Tucker's mouth quirked in a sympathetic smile. Ah. That particular joy hasn't changed since I left, I see. Some things never do. Delilah sighed, then lowered her voice. I should go. I have bookkeeping to finish before tomorrow. Let me walk you home. It wasn't really a request, and Delilah found she didn't have the energy to refuse. They made their excuses to the Perkinses, enduring knowing smiles and not so subtle hints about future invitations. Outside, the autumn afternoon had turned cool, the breeze carrying the scent of pine from the hills beyond town. Tucker offered Delilah his arm again, and this time she took it without hesitation, grateful for the steady support. I'm sorry about that, Tucker said as they walked. I shouldn't have accepted the invitation on your behalf. It wasn't my place. The apology surprised Delilah. The Tucker she remembered had rarely admitted to being wrong about anything. It's all right, she said. They would have talked regardless. Twin Falls has always thrived on gossip. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the tension between them easing slightly with each step. When they reached the Mercantile, Tucker didn't immediately say goodnight as Delilah expected. Instead, he stood uncertainly on the boardwalk, hat in hand. I meant what I said at the Perkinses, he told her. About staying in Twin Falls depending on having a reason. You're that reason, D. Delilah felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Tucker, I know I hurt you, he continued. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. He took a deep breath. Have dinner with me tomorrow night, just us. Let me explain everything why I left, what happened after, why I came back. After that, if you still want nothing to do with me, I'll respect your decision. Delilah studied his face, searching for any sign of the young, impetuous cowboy who had broken her heart. Instead, she saw a man, one who had clearly known hardship and growth, whose eyes held a depth of feeling that hadn't been there before. All right, she said finally. Dinner tomorrow, but I'm making no promises beyond that. The relief on Tucker's face was palpable. Thank you. I'll pick you up at 7. He hesitated, then bent and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his lips barely grazing her skin. Until tomorrow, he whispered, then turned and walked away, his spurs jingling faintly in the gathering dusk. Delilah touched her cheek where his lips had been, her heart racing despite her best efforts to remain unmoved. One dinner, she told herself firmly. One chance for closure, nothing more. But as she watched Tucker's retreating figure, a treacherous hope bloomed in her chest, hope she had thought long extinguished, now flickering back to life like an ember in the wind. Monday proved to be the longest day of Delilah's life. Every customer seemed to take twice as long as usual, every minute dragging like molasses in January. By closing time, her nerves were strung tighter than a fiddle string. She bathed carefully in the copper tub behind a screen in her living quarters above the store, washing her hair with lavender-scented soap. Her father had always ordered special from back east. After drying and pinning her chestnut locks into an elegant twist, she faced the difficult decision of what to wear. Her wardrobe was practical, rather than fashionable appropriate for a businesswoman in a small western town. But in the back of her wardrobe hung one dress she rarely had occasion to wear. A deep emerald silk that her father had given her for her 25th birthday, insisting that every woman should have at least one beautiful gown. For special occasions, he had said with a wink, never specifying what those occasions might be. Delilah hesitated, then reached for the green dress. If ever there was a night that qualified as a special occasion, surely this was it. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded on the mercantile's front door. Delilah descended the stairs slowly, one hand trailing the banister, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been since girlhood. Tucker stood on the other side of the door, holding a small box tied with ribbon. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, his dark hair neatly combed, his suit freshly pressed, his boots polished to a shine. When Delilah opened the door, he stared at her as though seeing a vision. "You're beautiful," he said simply, the words carrying no hint of practiced flattery, just honest admiration. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Tucker offered her the box. "This is for you." Inside, Delilah found a delicate silver bracelet adorned with small turquoise stones. It was elegant without being ostentatious, exactly to her taste. "Tucker, this is too much, please," he interrupted gently. "I saw it in Helena last month and thought of your eyes. The way they change color with your mood, sometimes blue, sometimes green." The fact that he remembered such a detail after all these years made Delilah's heart skip. She allowed him to fasten the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers warm against her skin. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his arm. Tucker had arranged for them to dine at the Twin Falls Hotel, the finest establishment in town. The hotel's small restaurant was normally closed on Mondays, but the owner had opened it especially for them, setting a single table by the window overlooking the town square. Candles glowed in silver holders, and a bottle of wine waited in a bucket of ice. "How did you manage this?" Delilah asked as Tucker held her chair. He smiled as he took his seat across from her. "Mr. Hollister and I go back a ways." He was happy to make an exception when I explained the situation. "And what situation is that?" Delilah raised an eyebrow. "That I'm trying to convince the most stubborn woman in Idaho territory to give me a second chance." Despite herself, Delilah laughed. "I see your talent for sweet talk hasn't diminished." Tucker's expression grew serious. "Not sweet talk, D, the truth." He poured wine for both of them, then raised his glass. "To honesty, long overdue." Delilah touched her glass to his. "To honesty," she agreed. The meal was exquisite by Twin Falls standards: tender roast duck with orange glaze, fresh vegetables from the hotel's garden, and freshly baked bread still warm from the oven. As they ate, Tucker began to tell his story. "After I left Twin Falls, I headed north with nothing but my horse and saddle and dreams bigger than sense," he said. "I had this idea that I'd find work on a ranch, save enough to buy my own land and send for you within a year." He laughed ruefully. Reality had other plans. "The first winter nearly killed me, coldest Montana had seen in 20 years, they said. I lost 2 toes to frostbite working cattle in blizzard conditions." Delilah gasped. "Tucker, I had no idea. How could you? I was too proud to write and tell you I was struggling." He shook his head. "By spring, I was broke, half-starved, and as far from my dreams as a man could get. That's when I met James Coulter." Tucker described how Coulter, a wealthy rancher with no sons, had taken a liking to him, offering him work and eventually a partnership in his sprawling cattle operation north of the Yellowstone. "He became like a father to me," Tucker said. "Taught me everything about running a successful ranch. When he died 3 years ago, he left it all to me." "So you got what you wanted," Delilah observed, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "The successful ranch you left Twin Falls to find." Tucker reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I got the ranch," he agreed quietly. "But I lost what mattered most. You." Delilah withdrew her hand, her emotions too confused to allow his touch. "Why didn't you come back sooner? 3 years you've owned this ranch, Tucker. Why wait until now to return to Twin Falls?" Pain flashed across his features. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd moved on. Afraid you'd married someone else. Afraid you'd slammed the door in my face, which I would have deserved." He took a deep breath. "Then I heard about your father's passing and that you'd returned to run the store. It felt like fate was giving me a second chance I didn't deserve." Delilah stared into her wine glass, watching the candlelight reflect in the dark liquid. "And what exactly are you hoping for, Tucker? That we pick up where we left off, as though 5 years haven't passed? That I simply forgive and forget?" "I'm hoping for the chance to earn your trust again," Tucker said earnestly. "I know it won't be easy. I know it will take time. But what we had, what I threw away, it was real. The kind of love that comes along once in a lifetime if a man's lucky." "And if I give you this chance," Delilah asked, meeting his gaze directly, "what then? You go back to Montana and I stay here in Twin Falls. Another long separation, more promises to write, to visit." Tucker set down his fork, his expression resolute. "No. If you give me this chance, I'm staying right here in Twin Falls. What about your ranch, the one you sacrificed everything for? I have capable foremen who run the day-to-day operations already. I can manage the business side from here." He leaned forward. "Or you could come with me to Montana. See the home I've built, the land that's waiting for a woman's touch." "Your touch?" Delilah shook her head slowly. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't simple," Tucker acknowledged. "Nothing worth having ever is. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, move mountains. Change my life completely. Because a life without you isn't much of a life at all." His words were everything Delilah had once dreamed of hearing. Yet the scar tissue around her heart made it hard to believe, to trust. "I'll disappoint you," she said softly. "I'm not the same girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. That girl died the day you rode away without looking back." Tucker's eyes never left hers as he replied, "Impossible." One word, spoken with such conviction that Delilah felt it resonate through her very bones. "You could never disappoint me, Delilah Hayes," Tucker continued, his voice low and intense. "The only disappointment in this story is me, the fool who didn't recognize the treasure he held until he'd thrown it away." They finished their meal in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When the last plate was cleared away, Tucker escorted Delilah back to the mercantile under a sky brilliant with stars. At her door, he took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "For listening. For giving me the chance to explain." Delilah nodded, unable to find words for the tumult of emotions within her. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Tucker asked. A sensible woman would say no. Would close the door on the past and protect her heart from further injury. But Delilah found herself nodding. "Yes," she whispered. "Tomorrow." Tucker's smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. "Good night, Delilah Hayes. Sweet dreams." As she watched him walk away, Delilah wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or perhaps, just maybe, giving herself a chance at the happiness she'd long ago abandoned hope of finding. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of emotions for Delilah. True to his word, Tucker called on her every day. sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a jar of honey from a local farm, wildflowers gathered during his morning rides. They took walks along the river, attended a town social together, and spent long evenings on the porch swing behind the mercantile, talking about everything and nothing. Tucker told her stories of Montana, the breathtaking beauty of the mountains, the vast expanse of his ranch, the wild creatures that roamed his land. Delilah shared tales of her time in Chicago, working as a shopkeeper's assistant while trying to heal her broken heart. Slowly, cautiously, the walls Delilah had built began to crumble. She found herself looking forward to Tucker's visits, missing him when he was away, remembering why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. His laugh, his quiet strength, the way he listened as though her every word mattered. But still, doubt lingered. The cattle drive would move on to boys soon. Would Tucker truly give up his life in Montana to stay in Twin Falls? Or would history repeat itself, leaving her heartbroken once more? On their final Sunday together, before the cattle drive was set to depart, Tucker invited Delilah for a picnic in the hills overlooking Twin Falls. He arrived at midday with a basket packed by the hotel kitchen and helped her into his rented buggy. "You're awfully quiet today," he observed as they left the town behind, the buggy wheels raising dust on the rutted trail. Delilah tried to smile, just thinking. "About tomorrow," she admitted. "When you leave." Tucker's hands tightened on the reins. "I told you, Dee. I'm not leaving, not unless you want me to go. The men can take the herd on to boys without me." "And then what? You stay in Twin Falls indefinitely, living at the hotel while I run my store and court like we did 5 years ago." The buggy crested a hill, and Tucker drew the horses to a halt beneath the shade of a massive pine tree. He turned to face Delilah, his expression solemn. "I had planned to wait until after our picnic for this, but perhaps now is better." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I'm not suggesting we pick up where we left off, Dee. I'm suggesting we start anew, on different terms." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a perfect diamond set in intricate gold filigree. It caught the sunlight, sending prisms dancing across the buggy's interior. "This isn't the ring I'd planned to give you 5 years ago," Tucker said quietly. "That ring was a simple band, all I could afford then. This one I had made in San Francisco last year, carrying it with me ever since, hoping for the courage to bring it to you." Delilah stared at the ring, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Tucker must hear it. "Tucker, I'm not asking for your answer now," he interrupted gently. "I know it's too soon. I know you still have doubts about me, about us. All I'm asking is that you consider it." He closed the box and pressed it into her palm. "Keep this. Think about what I'm offering, not just a ring, but a life together, whether here in Twin Falls in Montana or anywhere else you want to go." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. "How can I trust this? Trust you?" Tucker's gaze never wavered. "One day at a time. I'll prove myself to you, Dee. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your love if you'll let me." Delilah clutched the velvet box, her emotions too overwhelming to form a coherent response. Tucker seemed to understand. He squeezed her hand gently, then turned his attention back to the horses, guiding them the rest of the way to the picnic spot. They spread a blanket beneath an ancient oak whose branches created a natural canopy. The view was spectacular, the Snake River winding through the valley below, Twin Falls nestled along its banks, and in the distance, the hazy outline of mountains against the blue sky. Tucker unpacked the basket, revealing fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and a bottle of sparkling cider. They ate in companionable silence, the tension gradually easing as the beauty of the day worked its magic. After the meal, Tucker leaned back against the oak's trunk, watching as Delilah gathered wildflowers a few yards away. "My mother would have liked you," he said suddenly. Delilah looked up, surprised. Tucker rarely spoke of his parents, both lost to influenza when he was a teenager. "She was strong," he continued, "independent-minded, wouldn't take nonsense from anyone, especially my father." A smile touched his lips, but she loved him something fierce. Even when they fought and warred, could they fight, there was never any doubt they'd move heaven and earth for each other. Delilah returned to the blanket, sitting beside him with her gathered bouquet. "They sound wonderful." They were. Tucker took a deep breath. "After they died, I swore I'd never love anyone that much. It seemed too painful, too risky. Then I met you, and all those walls I'd built came crashing down." "So you ran," Delilah said softly, understanding dawning. Tucker nodded. "Partly for the reasons I told you, wanting to make something of myself, to be worthy of you. But yes, also because loving you terrified me. The power you had over my heart. It was overwhelming." Delilah twirled a wildflower between her fingers, considering his words. "And now? Does loving me still frighten you?" "Yes," Tucker admitted, "but losing you again terrifies me more." The honesty in his voice touched something deep within Delilah. For the first time, she truly believed he had changed, not just in circumstance, but in character. The boy who had fled from deep emotion had become a man willing to face his fears, to risk his heart openly. "I need time, Tucker," she said finally. "This is all happening so quickly." "Take all the time you need," he replied. "I'm not going anywhere." When they returned to town late that afternoon, Tucker walked Delilah to her door. The velvet box remained in her pocket, a weighty presence against her hip. "I'll come by in the morning to see you before the drive leaves," Tucker promised. "No pressure for an answer, Dee. Just to say goodbye for now." He kissed her then, a tender, questioning kiss that asked rather than demanded. Delilah found herself responding, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Tucker traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. "Sweet dreams, Delilah Hayes," he whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving her breathless and confused on her doorstep. That night, Delilah sat on her bed, the ring box open before her. The diamond caught the lamplight, winking at her like a star brought down to earth. She slipped it onto her finger experimentally, admiring how perfectly it fit, as though made for her hand alone, which she realized it had been. Tucker had carried this ring for a year, holding on to the hope that someday he might have the chance to offer it to her. What did that say about his feelings, his intentions? Delilah removed the ring and returned it to its box. Tomorrow, she would give Tucker her answer, an answer that had been forming in her heart from the moment he walked back into her store. Hat in hand, blue eyes filled with regret and hope. Morning came with a dramatic change in the weather. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a biting wind that hinted at an early winter storm. Delilah dressed warmly, securing the ring box in her pocket before descending to open the store. Tucker arrived earlier than expected, his expression troubled as he stamped snow from his boots. "Storm's coming in fast," he said without preamble. "Sanders thinks we need to get the herd moving now before the passes to Boys become impassable." Delilah's heart sank. "You're leaving right away?" Tucker nodded grimly. "I've got maybe 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Dee. This isn't how I wanted our goodbye to be." "Then don't say goodbye," Delilah found herself saying, the words falling from her lips before she could reconsider. She withdrew the ring box from her pocket and pressed it into Tucker's hand. "Ask me again." Tucker's eyes widened in surprise, then darkened with emotion. He opened the box and removed the ring, then took Delilah's hand in his. "Delilah Hayes," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my heart's companion for all the days we're given?" "Yes," Delilah whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, Tucker Wilson, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his kiss fierce and joyful. Delilah clung to him, her doubts silenced by the certainty that this here in Tucker's embrace was where she belonged. All too soon, Tucker pulled away, his expression torn. "I have to go." "The herd, I know." Delilah straightened his collar, trying to be brave. "Go, take care of your business in boys. I'll be here when you return." Tucker kissed her once more, quickly. 3 weeks, he promised. 4 at the most. Then I'll be back and we'll make plans for our future. He grinned suddenly, boyishly. "Mrs. Tucker Wilson has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Delilah laughed through her tears. "It sounds perfect." With a final kiss to her hand, Tucker was gone, striding purposefully toward the livery where his horse waited. Delilah watched from the doorway of the mercantile as he mounted up and rode to join his men at the edge of town, where the massive herd of cattle was already beginning to move northward. She stood there long after the last rider had disappeared from view, the diamond on her finger catching the weak sunlight that filtered through the gathering storm clouds. 3 weeks, she thought, a small price to pay for a lifetime together. But the storm that blew in that day was merely a harbinger of what was to come. Over the next week, Twin Falls experienced the earliest and most severe winter weather in living memory. Snow fell in blanketing drifts, piling against buildings and making roads impassable. The temperature plummeted, freezing the Snake River solid in places. Delilah worried constantly about Tucker and his men, driving cattle through such conditions. Had they reached Boise before the worst of the weather hit? Were they safe? Warm? The uncertainty was maddening. 2 weeks after Tucker's departure, a stranger rode into Twin Falls, half frozen and exhausted. He was one of Tucker's drovers, Delilah learned, sent back with news that the cattle drive was stranded in a valley 30 miles northwest of town. The snow in the mountain passes was too deep for the herd to continue to Boise, and they were running dangerously low on supplies. "Mr. Wilson sent me to arrange for provisions," the young cowboy explained as he warmed himself by the stove in Delilah's store. "Said to tell folks in town we need food, medicine, blankets, whatever can be spared. He's offering good money." "Is everyone all right?" Delilah asked anxiously. "Tucker, is he well?" the cowboy nodded. "Boss is fine, madam, working harder than any 2 men, keeping spirits up. But we lost some cattle to the cold, and one of the men's got a bad cough that won't quit." Delilah made a quick decision. "I'm coming back with you." The cowboy looked alarmed. "Begging your pardon, madam, but that's no journey for a lady. Trail's dangerous in this weather." "Boss would have my hide if I let his intended risk herself like that." "I wasn't asking permission," Delilah said firmly. "I'm a better rider than most men in this town, and I know these hills better than you do. Besides, my father was a doctor before he opened the mercantile. I have his medical kit and the knowledge to use it." The young man still looked doubtful, but Delilah was already gathering supplies, medicines, bandages, preserved foods, and warm clothing. She recruited volunteers from town to assemble additional provisions, and by the following morning, a small relief party was ready to depart for the stranded cattle drive. Mayor Simmons tried one last time to dissuade her. "Miss Hayes, be reasonable. Let the men handle this. Your place is here, safe in town." Delilah fixed him with a steely gaze. "My place is with my fiancé, Mayor. Now, are you going to help us load these supplies, or are you going to continue telling me what a woman can and cannot do?" The journey was every bit as difficult as the young cowboy had warned. The snow lay deep on the trail, and the biting wind cut through even the thickest clothing. Twice they were forced to stop and seek shelter in abandoned line shacks when blizzard conditions made continuing impossible. But Delilah never complained, never suggested turning back. Her determination seemed to inspire the men in the relief party, who pushed on with grim resolve through conditions that would normally have sent them scurrying back to town. On the third day, they crested a ridge and saw the valley below where Tucker's cattle drive had made camp. Crude shelters had been erected for the men, while the cattle huddled together in the lee of a hill, seeking what protection they could from the relentless wind. Delilah's heart leaped at the sight of riders coming out to meet them, and one in particular, his tall frame unmistakable even at a distance. Tucker urged his horse through the snow, reaching them before the others. "Delilah," he called in disbelief, as he recognized her among the relief party. "What in God's name, hello to you too," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face despite the cold. "I brought supplies. And myself." Tucker's expression shifted from shock to concern to something like wonder. He dismounted and strode to her horse, reaching up to help her down. The moment her feet touched the ground, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, seemingly unconcerned about the audience of grinning cowboys. "You impossible, stubborn, magnificent woman," he murmured against her hair. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that journey was?" "About as dangerous as driving cattle through a blizzard, I'd wager," Delilah retorted, pulling back to examine his face. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. But he was whole, alive, and looking at her as though she were the sun breaking through after a month of storms. The camp erupted in celebration at the arrival of supplies. Hot food was prepared, warm clothing distributed, and Delilah set to work examining the sick cowboy, whose bad cough had developed into pneumonia. With her father's medical kit and knowledge, she was able to ease his symptoms and prescribe a treatment that would hopefully see him recovered enough to travel soon. That night, huddled in Tucker's tent with a small stove providing meager warmth, Delilah finally heard the full story of what had happened after the drive left Twin Falls. "We made it about halfway to Boise before the storm hit in earnest," Tucker explained, his arm around her as they shared a blanket. "Tried to push through, but the passes were completely snowed in. Had to double back to this valley, best shelter we could find for the herd." "How long do you think you'll be stranded here?" Delilah asked. Tucker sighed. "Hard to say. Could be a week, could be a month. Depends on when the weather breaks enough to clear the passes." He looked down at her, his expression troubled. "You shouldn't be here, Dee. It's not safe." "I'm exactly where I should be," Delilah replied firmly. "Besides, your men need medical attention and I'm the closest thing to a doctor for 50 miles. Tucker shook his head in amazement. "When I imagined you as my wife, I pictured keeping you safe, protected. Should have known better. You've never needed anyone to fight your battles for you." "No," Delilah agreed, "but that doesn't mean I don't want you beside me when the fighting starts." She nestled closer to his warmth. "We're partners, Tucker, in everything. That's what marriage means." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with increasing passion. Delilah responded in kind, her arms twining around his neck, her body molding to his as though they were made to fit together this way. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "We should wait," he said, though his tone suggested it was the last thing he wanted. "Do this proper. A church wedding with you in white and me in my Sunday best." Delilah smiled, touching his cheek. "Always the gentleman when it counts the most." "Only with you," Tucker replied, kissing her palm. "Only ever with you." The next 2 weeks in the camp were a trial of endurance for everyone. The weather remained brutally cold, with periodic snow squalls that kept visibility to near zero. The cattle grew thin despite the hay brought in the relief supplies, and tensions among the men occasionally flared as cabin fever set in. Through it all, Tucker and Delilah worked as a team. She tended the sick, prepared meals, and helped maintain morale with her unflagging optimism. He managed the men, cared for the herd, and made the difficult decisions necessary to keep everyone alive in such harsh conditions. Each night, they retreated to Tucker's tent, sharing the small space and bodily warmth with strict propriety, though the effort became increasingly difficult as their wedding day seemed to recede further into an uncertain future. "I've been thinking," Delilah said one evening as they sat close to the stove, reviewing the dwindling inventory of supplies. "We don't need to wait for a church wedding." Tucker looked up from his ledger, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" "Judge Abbott deputized Marshal Coleman before we left Twin Falls. The marshal has the authority to perform marriages." Delilah met Tucker's gaze steadily. "We could be married here, now." Tucker set aside the ledger, taking Delilah's hands in his. "Is that what you want?" "Not the white dress, the church full of flowers, your friends watching you walk down the aisle. What I want is to be your wife," Delilah said simply. "The rest is just trimmings." Tucker's smile was slow and wondering. "Mrs. Tucker Wilson," he said, testing the sound of it. "Ready to take on a husband, a ranch, and a herd of troublesome cattle all at once." "I believe I'm equal to the challenge," Delilah replied with a smile of her own. 2 days later, with the entire camp in attendance, Marshal Coleman performed a brief but heartfelt ceremony in the largest tent. Delilah wore her best dress, not white, but a deep blue that matched Tucker's eyes, with a small bunch of pine needles and dried berries for a bouquet. Tucker had somehow managed to shave and slick back his hair, looking every inch the successful rancher despite the rugged surroundings. "Do you, Tucker Wilson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the marshal asked. "To have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Tucker replied, his voice clear and certain. "And do you, Delilah Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" Delilah looked into Tucker's eyes, seeing all the love and promise of their future reflected there. "I do," she said. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the Idaho Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." The marshal grinned. "You may kiss your bride, Wilson." Tucker didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Delilah into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness and passion that the assembled cowboys whooped and cheered. That night, in the privacy of their tent, now truly theirs, husband and wife consummated their marriage with the sweet urgency of those who had waited far too long to become one. Afterward, lying in Tucker's arms beneath a pile of blankets, Delilah had never felt more content, more certain of her place in the world. "No regrets?" Tucker asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "None," Delilah assured him. "Though I must admit, this isn't exactly how I pictured spending my honeymoon." Tucker chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "When we get to Montana, I'll make it up to you. My home there, our home now, it's beautiful D. Situated on a rise overlooking the valley with mountains all around. In spring, the meadows are filled with wildflowers, more than you can imagine." "It sounds wonderful," Delilah murmured. "But if you'd rather stay in Twin Falls," Tucker continued, "we can do that too." "I meant what I said. I'll go wherever you want to go, be wherever you need to be." Delilah raised herself on one elbow to look at her husband. I've been thinking about that, actually. The mercantile in Twin Falls, it was my father's dream, not mine. I took it on out of duty and necessity. She traced the line of Tucker's jaw with her fingertip. But a ranch in Montana, a home we build together, that could be our dream. The smile that broke across Tucker's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Are you sure? It would mean leaving everything you know. I'm sure, Delilah replied. As long as we're together, I'm home. Tucker kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. 3 days later, the weather finally broke. The temperature rose just enough to begin melting the snow in the mountain passes, and scouts reported that the trail to Boise would soon be passable. The camp burst into activity as men prepared to resume the cattle drive, their spirits lifted by the prospect of completing their journey at last. "You'll stay in Boise while I finish the cattle business," Tucker told Delilah as they packed their few belongings. "There's a decent hotel there. Once the herd is sold, we'll head straight for Montana." Delilah nodded, already anticipating the comfort of a real bed, hot baths, and meals not cooked over a camp stove. But more than that, she looked forward to beginning their life together properly as husband and wife, partners in all things. The journey to Boise was arduous but uneventful. The cattle, though thinner than when they'd left Twin Falls, fetched a good price from a buyer desperate for beef after the early winter had disrupted normal supply routes. Tucker concluded the business efficiently, paid his men generously, and arranged for the telegram to be sent to his ranch in Montana, informing his foreman of his impending return with a wife. "Ready for the next adventure, Mrs. Wilson?" Tucker asked as he helped Delilah into the stagecoach that would begin their journey northward. Delilah looked at her husband, this man who had broken her heart and then healed it, who had matured from an impetuous boy into a steady, reliable partner. "With you." "Always," she replied, taking his hand. The journey to Montana took them through breathtaking scenery, towering mountains, vast plains, forests that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Delilah drank in every sight, storing the memories to share with their children someday. When they finally crested the last rise, and Tucker's ranch came into view, Delilah gasped. It was everything he had described, and more, a sprawling main house built of golden logs, a collection of well-maintained outbuildings, and beyond them, pastures that rolled gently toward distant mountains capped with snow. "Welcome home, Dee," Tucker said softly, his arm around her waist as they stood in the wagon that had brought them from the nearest town. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. "It's beautiful, Tucker, more than I imagined." The ranch hands had prepared for their arrival, and the house was warm and welcoming when they entered. A middle-aged woman named Mrs. Perkins, no relation to the Perkinses of Twin Falls, served as housekeeper and cook, greeting Delilah with genuine warmth and a promise to teach her all the ways of the house when she's ready. That night, in the massive 4-poster bed that dominated the master bedroom, Delilah and Tucker consummated their marriage again, this time in proper comfort, with the luxury of time and privacy that had been absent in the trail camp. "Happy?" Tucker asked afterward as they lay tangled together, watching moonlight pour through the window. "Impossibly so," Delilah replied, resting her head on his chest. Who would have thought that the girl who once declared "I'll disappoint you" would find such happiness with the stubborn cowboy who refused to believe it? Tucker's laugh vibrated pleasantly beneath her ear. "I told you it was impossible. You could never disappoint me, Delilah Wilson. Not in 1,000 years." As winter gave way to spring, Delilah settled into life as a rancher's wife with surprising ease. She learned to ride astride rather than side saddle, mastered the complex logistics of feeding a bunkhouse full of hungry cowboys, and even developed a knack for basic veterinary care among the livestock. Tucker watched his wife bloom in her new environment with pride and amazement. The independent spirit that had first attracted him to Delilah found full expression on the ranch, where her intelligence and adaptability proved invaluable. By their first anniversary, Delilah had another piece of news to share: a baby. Tucker repeated, his expression shifting from shock to joy as Delilah nodded confirmation. "We're having a baby next spring," Delilah said, laughing as Tucker swept her into his arms and twirled her around the kitchen. "Careful with my wife, boss," called Mrs. Perkins from the doorway, though her stern expression was belied by the twinkle in her eye. "She's in a delicate condition now." "Delicate?" Tucker laughed, setting Delilah gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "This woman rode 30 miles through a blizzard, married me in a cattle camp, and has been running circles around every man on this ranch since the day she arrived. There's nothing delicate about my D." "Nevertheless," Delilah said, patting her still flat stomach, "perhaps a bit more caution is in order for the next few months." Tucker sobered immediately, his protective instincts surging to the fore. "Whatever you need, D, anything at all." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Delilah maintaining her active role in ranch operations until the final months, when Tucker insisted she rest more and allow others to take on her duties. Their son, James Frederick Wilson, was born on a perfect spring morning in 1887, with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the entire household. "He has your eyes," Tucker whispered, cradling his newborn son with a mixture of terror and adoration. "And your spirit, I'd wager." "Poor child," Delilah murmured, exhausted but radiant. "Imagine having two stubborn parents. He'll never stand a chance." Little James Jamie to his doting parents thrived in the ranch environment. By his first birthday, he was toddling determinedly after his father whenever Tucker was within sight, and by 2, he had developed a fascination with the horses that kept both parents in a constant state of watchful anxiety. The Wilson Ranch prospered under Tucker and Delilah's joint management. They expanded their holdings, introduced better breeding stock, and developed a reputation for both quality cattle and fair dealing. Cowmen came from as far as Texas to buy Wilson breeding bulls, and the ranch's brand became synonymous with excellence throughout the territory. In 1890, Delilah gave birth to twin daughters Elizabeth and Catherine, completing their family, and bringing even more joy to the home Tucker and Delilah had built together. Life wasn't always easy. The Montana winters were harsh, the work never ending, and the challenges of raising 3 spirited children while running a large ranch sometimes left both parents exhausted. But through it all, Tucker and Delilah remained partners in the truest sense, sharing burdens, celebrating triumphs, and facing each new day together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised Delilah with a trip back to Twin Falls. The town had grown considerably in their absence, with the railroad now connecting it to the wider world and bringing new prosperity to the valley. They visited old friends, showed their children the places where their parents had first met and fallen in love, and even stopped by the mercantile now owned by a young couple who had transformed it into a thriving general store. On their last evening in Twin Falls, Tucker took Delilah to the spot by the river where he had once confessed his feelings for her, both the first time as young lovers, and later when he had returned seeking her forgiveness. "Any regrets?" he asked as they sat together on the familiar fallen log, watching the sun set over the water. Delilah rested her head against his shoulder. "Not a single one," she replied truthfully. "Every moment, even the painful ones, led us here to this life we've built. How could I regret any of it?" Tucker's arm tightened around her waist. "10 years ago, you said you'd disappoint me," he reminded her with a smile. "I think it's safe to say you were wrong about that." "And you said it was impossible," Delilah replied, tilting her face up to his. "I think it's safe to say you were right." "First and last time," Tucker laughed, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the deeper love that had grown between them over a decade of shared life. As they walked back to town hand in hand, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them here from young lovers torn apart by circumstance and pride, to mature partners who had weathered storms both literal and figurative together. She thought of their children waiting at the hotel with their grandmother Jamie with Tucker's blue eyes and her stubborn chin, Lizzie and Katie with their matching dimples and mischievous grins. She thought of their ranch in Montana, the home they had built from Tucker's dreams and her determination. And she thought of the future stretching before them, unknown but full of promise, because they would face it together. "I love you, Tucker Wilson," she said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path to look up at her husband. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." Tucker's smile was the same one that had captured her heart all those years ago, a little crooked, a little cocky, but now tempered with the wisdom and patience that time had brought. "And I love you, Delilah Wilson," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Always have, always will." As they resumed their walk back to town, the first stars appearing overhead, Delilah felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach her very soul. The girl who had once believed herself destined to disappoint had found, instead, a life filled with purpose and joy. And the cowboy who had declared such disappointment impossible had proven, every day for 10 years, that love, real, enduring love, could indeed overcome any obstacle. It was, Delilah thought, the most beautiful kind of impossible there was.